diverse group of people passionate about ecological restoration in the Keurbooms catchment and its impacts on our water crisis that we're currently suffering. And the purpose of today is really to just get everybody on the same page in terms of learning from what DEP has done up until this stage and what the vision is, but also really learning from Louise and what the Nature Conservancy has done in the Cape Town catchments with the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, and how they really have mobilized ecological infrastructure restoration, and it's happening on the ground with many teams, and already seeing impacts in terms of river flow. And so this is really a fantastic model for us to learn from. And from here, Louise and John will be then presenting to Alberto Council and Mayor to see if we can get some, hopefully the goal will be some kind of resolution to work towards ecological restoration of the entire Keurbooms catchment and the impact on our water systems. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Marlene Ross, who's head of biodiversity and coastal management from DEP, and she's just going to introduce John and Louise. So thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you so much. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak to ecological infrastructure investment framework, something that we started in 2021, actually concluded in 2021 as a provincial strategy, ultimately a climate change adaptation response strategy, which if we invest in ecological infrastructure, it's low to no risk in terms of a response strategy. And even how we adapt to climate change involves inherent risk if we choose the wrong pathways, right? But investing in ecological infrastructure contributes to multiple outcomes. So not just biodiversity and water outcomes, work opportunities, climate change response, as I mentioned, ensuring that infrastructure is seen and cast in a wider purpose and wider definition, that ecological infrastructure is also infrastructure. So where does it all fit in action? If ecological infrastructure is this fulcrum through which we can address all of these multi-benefits and priorities, well, it all flows really from an international set of goals and targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework as a start. And there's some really ambitious targets in terms of 30 by 30 targets for both protected areas expansion as well as restoration. And we ultimately, as whole of government, whether you Sandparks, Cape Nature, Western Cape Government, are all aligning towards trying to achieve those targets together. And how do we do that? Well, it's like conducting an orchestra, some can say herding cats. But the strength of what we can do together is really built on the strategic partnerships and the landscape partners that exist on the ground, that change things on the ground. Because if we don't change something on the ground, we haven't really achieved anything. So it's a big challenge to work from the global scale all the way to the local scale, but that's what we have to do. That's the challenge we have to take on. The Western Cape Government has a range of strategies which are driving growth for jobs as a critical area. That's the super strategy in terms of the priority, in terms of growing the economy, unlocking and ensuring that our resources are resilient for the long term. So resource resilience as keyed into that as a provincial strategy. And then critically within the province we have a provincial biodiversity strategy and action plan as well as a coastal program, the latter being required by law. And we work across the landscape with estuary forums, municipalities, landscape initiatives to achieve that. The really important piece of this puzzle are the municipalities. Okay, so the municipalities are at the interface of service and resilience, and of course, citizens. And how can we support municipalities to really implement, which are quite ambitious targets? Firstly, embracing this concept of ecological infrastructure as infrastructure, as important as the grey infrastructure, in order to ensure long-term delivery of services to citizens. And I don't need to speak to you, you've all survived a very dry season, huge concerns around service delivery, I understand, as well as infrastructure maintenance, and of course, ecological infrastructure maintenance is at the heart of all of this. And John will speak to this in a lot more detail, one of the critical areas that we are working on is unlocking alternative and blended finance models. So, us as Western Cape Government are a key partner with the Greater Cape Water Fund, which has really shown the way in the Western Cape supply system, focusing on the strategic water source areas. We'll speak more about that. Those are our water factories. You want to know where our water comes from? Not from the tap. It comes from the catchment. And those catchments are desperate for our care, maintenance, restoration. Our key landscape partners are, I think this is where we are extremely lucky in the Western Cape. We have a very active conservation sector. Just in this room, I count at least 5 landscape organizations that are all busy and trying to align to achieve some of their objectives. And how do we do that with better impact in terms of these outcomes? How do we use that power on the ground to leverage investment of the private sector? And how do we get government's skin in the game? Because with government's skin in the game, we can leverage all of those things. So one of the critical projects that we will be carrying forward, which we will be speaking today about a little bit with the municipality, is bringing ecological infrastructure investment framework from the provincial scale to the municipal scale. So really focusing on a risk-based analysis of where are the priorities for municipalities to invest in their ecological infrastructure in order that they can deliver services on a sustainable, resilient basis. That means really taking forward the work we've done as our department and my unit in the Keurbooms space, with many of the stakeholders sitting here already. How do we now pull that forward with the municipality, looking at innovative financing mechanisms, but firstly, how do we assist the municipality in actually putting an ecological infrastructure investment plan together and program together? And how can we mainstream that, for example, into IDP and budgets? How can we use that to unlock the partnerships that we so desperately need in the landscape, to make the change on the ground, to generate the value chain opportunities in biomass, to support the water value chains as well? And how do we do that as part of a just transition? How do we do that in ways that is a whole of society approach? So this is our mission. We potentially heard good news that this program, as part of our Western Cape Water Resilience Strategy, our program with municipalities, we've got our fingers, toes, ankles, and any other number crossed to hope that that allocation will be given to us for 26-27 financial year. But we have already started working on a pilot with the Keurbooms municipality. And that is really showing us the way. We're doing that in-house in order to fine-tune methodologies. How do we get the municipality's commitment? How does it get mainstreamed into their service delivery approaches? So, for example, conspicuous by its absence in some water services plans of the municipality is ecological infrastructure. It's actually absent most of the time when I see it. We have a deepening recognition that ecological infrastructure is infrastructure. Our Western Cape infrastructure framework incorporates ecological infrastructure. We have a place at the table. You know what they say? If you aren't at the table, you may be on the menu. So we're at the table, and we are driving this strategy very, very hard, and are trying to unlock the municipal space as a priority moving forward. So just going back to the kind of modelling that we're looking at, it really needs to be based on ground truth data on the baseline that we're trying to intervene in, and from there develop the plans based on a risk-based approach. Water, fire, flooding, land degradation as the key risks that befall municipalities if they do not manage ecological infrastructure. And obviously in this context, not just in terms of the Biodiversity Act requirement, as in you need to clear your own land and have a plan for it. No, it's about the municipality's jurisdiction and where these risks emanate from, which, I repeat, is from unmanaged ecological infrastructure. So that's where we're going. I've been trying to paint a very quick picture for you, but I'm going to now hand over to my colleagues, John, and to our strategic partner, Louise, to take you into a bit of deeper dive as to what we're trying to achieve in this space.
Research, do you mean the land, or how far to the land go?
The municipal jurisdiction and where the risks emanate from. So they would need to look at Cape Nature land, Sand Parks land, and all of that. So it's within the municipal boundary, but then also areas of influence. For example, if there's source catchments for the Bardrook Dam or whatever, we need to zone in on them because that's where the risk emanates from. So when I say risk-based approach, it's being driven by that data. And the primary data there is obviously your biodiversity spatial plans, your flood lines, your coastal risk areas, your estuary plans, and most importantly, your invasive alien plant information. Okay. I'm going to hold it there because I'm now going into the territory that John is covering in his presentation. But I'm here and I'd love to field questions and have conversations with all of you moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marlene. I think so. Marlene has spoken to a lot of the content in this presentation. For me, I thought one of the major outcomes from this space was to get a sense of what you guys would like to see coming from the meeting with the municipality. So the idea was to give you a cook's tour of ecological infrastructure, a little bit more time in terms of water funds and the Greater Cape water bonds, sorry. And then have some discussion around what people would like to see coming out of the meeting this afternoon. So please feel free to bring your suggestions forward. What would make sense to landowners, what would make sense to landscape partners, with the municipality being an absolutely critical member of this whole society approach. I don't think I have to spend much time defining ecological infrastructure to anyone in this room. It sounds like everybody has quite comfortable, familiar with the term, but in short, it's nothing new, it's not a new invention, it is just a reframing of nature. Nature has given us goods and services free of charge for millennia. We having to, now that more and more of us live in cities, bring those benefits into boardrooms, into meetings where people are talking about built infrastructure and not remembering that we get benefits or goods and services from nature free of charge. So ecological infrastructure is just reframing those goods and services and putting in a terminology that is comparable to built infrastructure. So it's no surprise that it's called ecological infrastructure because it is supposed to be in concert with built infrastructure. And we're seeing a growing prominence of these types of approaches as more and more of us live in cities. But talking more technically, there are various components within our social and our ecological systems that interact with one another to give rise to a certain good or service. So water being a topical point here, it's your mountain catchments, it's your rainfall, it's the biota, abiota within the landscapes that all contribute to the actual generation of water. And as Marlene mentioned, there are multiple co-benefits. The great thing about ecological infrastructure is you go for one benefit, but you almost always score 3 or 4 additional ones. So in this instance, this was on the other side of the mountain, so in the Western Cape water supply system. They cleared this river, which was choked up entirely by eucalypts, and they freed up water. They also freed up the actual river, allowing people to use it for recreational purposes and then also spiritual purposes, as well as all the biodiversity benefits that come from it. So just an example of you go after one objective, but you score on multiple fronts, allowing us to blend different mandates and budgets towards shared objectives. Again, probably don't need to show this slide, but this is what an invaded catchment looks like, almost like outside. And what happens with these pines in this instance is they draw down the water table, they denude the soil, which means that when the water falls, it doesn't have any stopping it, increases velocity, it doesn't go into the ground. gets sucked up by the trees and gets evapotranspired into the atmosphere. So you've got less water in your ground, less water in your streams, less water in your dams. You also have a higher risk of erosion because you've got no surface cover. You've got an increased fire load, you've got perch wetlands, the whole system starts failing. And by removing those invasive plants, you can reduce those risks that might be mentioned. If you take a look at a naturally vegetated landscape, you have much more predictable cycles. So you will still have fire, but those fires are less intense and more predictable, and engineers can design infrastructure around those predictable occurrences. It's not as unpredictable as the alien plants are. You have healthy catchments and wetlands that release water over long periods of time, so you don't have these rapid releases of water that cause erosion and sedimentation, and you have healthy soils that can support sustainable agriculture. So that's where we want to go to, and that's why alien plants are often seen as being sort of the big scourge of the ecological construction debate. We are the most effective province in the country when it comes to alien plants in terms of mean annual runoff. Your landscape included is the highest category of mean annual runoff reduction. 3 billion in direct damage, loss of 2,000 formal jobs, 900 houses in the 2017 fires. I think this is probably still a sore topic for this landscape, and we've had experts tell us that the landscape is looking very much like it was before those fires in 2017. So just a matter of time. Looking at George, 750 million rand of infrastructure damage by the George floods in 2021, and then 880 million rand of infrastructure damage in the September 2023 floods in the Overberg district. This is the onerous catchments and onerous beach, and this was 180 million rand of direct infrastructure damage, but then interestingly here they cancelled the whale festival because of this event, and that all of this damage, which happened in September 2023, could have been staved off by 250,000 rand spent in the right time. And that's at least what the environment manager at Overstrand says. So it just shows you an order of magnitude. Even if you were to intervene now, it's 34 million rand to get on top of the system. And 180 million rand minimum was what it actually cost. If you look at disasters throughout the province, you can see increasing frequency and variety of disasters. And I think for me, this is an indication that the climate scientists were right. Climate change is happening, those disasters are more intense and more frequent. But at the same time, our ecosystems are being degraded, and they're actually increasing the risk of climate impact, which then drives further ecosystem degradation. And so we're reaching these tipping points where things are going to rapidly get worse, as opposed to just linearly get worse. Marlene's touched on the Ecological Construction Investment Framework. It was a co-created product with many of the institutions in this room present. It sets out objectives around 4 risks and gives us a spatial representation of those risks, and then also gives us an implementation and monitoring plan, giving us a little bit of how does the technical guitar, what actually does it mean in reality. But paraphrasing, it means by 2040 we live in a province that has healthy ecological construction that underpins our psychological and human well-being and protects from climate change. So the 4 investment objectives are around water quality and quantity, reduce the threat of wildfires, improve rangeland management. These alien plants often alter the soil that they stand on and reduce their productivity, and then reduce exposure to increased flooding, both coastal and inland flooding. Spatially, this is what it looks like. They did a multi-criteria analysis, broke down the province into quaternary catchments, and then identified high priority catchments as red in this image and low priority catchments as blue. This is just the water security one. There maps for all of the risks that I mentioned earlier. I think one thing I did want to show you was that another initiative that Marlene spoke to about strategic water source areas. So this is a completely separate effort around mapping important water areas, arrived at a very similar distribution of priority when it comes to looking after water security. So I'll show you the map here of all the strategic water source areas, the surface water source areas in the province versus the ecological construction investment framework. And you have 2 of those in this landscape, the Otaniqua and the Tsitsikamma strategic water source areas. Right, so in this arena, we also are tracking trends. One of the trends we've identified is that we're speaking about a tragic comment. It's a problem that we all live with, but no one really owns it. So it's very difficult to say, hey, John Wilson, you're not getting on top of things. You can, but often the fingers pointing back at you when you do that. And we're also seeing that there's been a significant reduction in public funding into this space. So one article found that 78% of the budget pre-COVID has been withdrawn, and then personal communication with our president suggests that as much as 82% has been withdrawn from this program nationally. He also says that there's no clearing in the Western Cape outside of sandparks areas, so it's a large retraction of the program in the Western Cape. But there are other opportunities. Lots of people are identifying this as being a whole society approach, as Marty mentioned, so they're all putting their brains together and coming up with these collaborative approaches, and more mechanisms are being unpacked. I think Marty mentioned earlier today that these mechanisms have probably always been there, but they haven't really been explored to the fullest. I think we're beginning to explore the various mechanisms to generate money into the catchment during this time of scarcity. Interestingly, that first red bar is when I joined ecological infrastructure. No, thanks. Okay, so that's, and then just Louise, this is just the business case for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, these two slides, and if you want to speak to them.
Yeah, I just want to see which two you have in. So, water funds, and just quickly the context, it's a public-private partnership, so it doesn't sit in government. But what's important is it doesn't take government's mandate. Government still has a mandate. But water funds are governance and funding mechanisms where it's and the big difference is we often go and say, we want money to do what? And what the business case helps us is to answer that question, to do what? Because we always say we've got to spend this on what? To do what? And if we spend this, then what? So, when we do a water, I can talk, and I'm happy to discuss, because this is not, we're not coming here, I'm not going to say this is what needs to be done. A water fund is a co-creation, it's common vision, and pull people together to move in the same direction. And for Cape Town, there was a prediction that Cape Town will run out of water by 2021. That's past tense. Demand outstrips supply. The city first thing they did is they said, we are a water services provider, we're going to fix our pipes, make sure that there are no leaks or minimize the leaks. They introduced water pressure, they drop the pressure during the night, so if there's a pipe burst, you don't get it as quickly. So that happened in 2014, 15, when the studies came out that Cape Town will face a water security challenge. Then the drought came, and before the drought, way before, they said, if the pawpaw hits the fan, we are going to draw in for groundwater in the Cape Mountain aquifer, which is a deep aquifer, and that exploratory boreholes in strategic places in the catchments, and those boreholes were just sitting there, and all they did is they kept the path to the borehole open, so that's all they did. When the drought hit, they said, okay, we've got to start drilling. And then they will pump 260 exploratory boreholes. Where do we drill? We drill near a winter. What's our most precious or most threatened ecosystem? Wetlands. But the city is really, there's monitoring systems, so they do that in a responsible way. But when your back is against the wall, you start doing things that give that quick solution. Nature-based solutions is not a quick fix, but in the absence of other methods, it won't work. So it needs to be a holistic integrated. The other thing that the city said, okay, we are running out of water. The engineers say my job is to make sure that people have water, that politicians say that I've been voted in, I need to provide the service. So they think in one direction, there were studies that clearing aliens will help us get more water in the system, but it wasn't quantified. What we did is we worked with the city. So the city of Cape Town came on board and we formed a steering committee. Province, Marine was there was the city, we were about 7 or 8 that started talking to each other from different groups. So we said to the city, what's your plan? They said we wanted to do desalination. We're thinking about groundwater exploration, and that's the boreholes that I'm talking about. We talk about water reuse, full flow storage scheme increase, and then we said that we also have pine plantations in your catchment, and then we added that as a step. So these are the options, and then we did ran models, economic models to say how much would each cost. The city gave us their figures, and we did this graph was the result, and it shows that your most cost-effective long-term solution is nature-based solutions. In other words, whatever is wrong in the catchment, is it degradation, is it aliens, what is wrong in the catchment? So we're not clearing aliens. We look at restoring catchments for water security. So if you just look at what, and then we did the comparison with desalination, and the return on investment is 350% return on investment. The current National Water Fund is a 30-year program. Okay, the 30-year program. That's the main thing. It's a long-term program. Then the questions that we ask ourselves is, where's the scope? It's not the strategic water source. We're asking, where does the water come from? And where does it flow to? Who cares about it? And then we say, what's wrong in this country? We do an analysis, and there's a lot of work that's already been done here. So we'll be looking at that has been done, if we make it practical here, and say, what do we know? And in order to come up with a return on investment, what studies need to, what's the gap? What do we still need to do? So we looked at the catchments, of the Western Cape water supply system, and we overlaid the invasive plant map, and we said, where do we lose the most water? It's in 30% of the catchments, we're losing 70% of the water. So there it becomes clear. Then we said, okay, and one of it was a very interesting, and I think maybe you will identify with it, that it said, okay, but we've got to clear it now. If we deploy 5,000 people right now, and we clear those catchments, then we solve the problem. We're not, because it's not practical. A lot of these areas are very remote, and so we plan long term. And then we said, okay, what would be the shortest time that we could turn water losses, the 55 billion liters of water that we're losing every year? What's the shortest turnaround time? We said, if we deploy 350 people every day for 6 years, we can turn the water losses into days. And then we said, high impact phase. That's when but the maintenance phase is critical. And that's that long term. And then we count the return on investment on full cost implementation. So we ran models of business of do nothing. If we don't do anything, what will happen? The water losses will increase to 100 billion liters within 20 years. Then we said, okay, so if we do the full cost implementation, how much will it cost the first 6 years? It will cost 370 million. That's what we need to turn the losses into gains. We said we need 350 people every day to do the job. And then the picture will look like this. So the water gains under a full cost implementation will continue to increase. The orange line is the cost for the review, will come down. And you see those spikes, we thought that's how the teams will be. You need 1 year, you need 350, and then we modeled all of that and we wrote it into the business case. But how do we know we succeed with monitoring? So we have hydrological monitoring in the rivers to see monitor stream flow, temperature, water pressure, and rainfall. We have follow a clear catchment approach where we leave catchments invaded, and we have a reference catchment, and we start to compare what's happening. And then we will clear after 5 years the one pair, and then you have that direct correlation. Then now we monitor every contract we put out, we monitor. We have online database, anybody can go there. If you type in Greater Cape Town Waterfront Decision Support System, just Google it, and if you don't have it, we'll send you the link. There, that's a decision support system. Everything we do is logged there. Where are we working? Who's working there? How much does it cost? Is it follow up? Are we going? So that can be monitored by the investor. And then we said business as usual. So you have to do nothing. 100 billion business as usual is stop, start. I have money. I'll clear a few trees. This one will clear. It's never going to win the battle because it's not consistent. So we will, after around now, start looking at what the science tell us. We already we've cleared 41,000 hectares of the 55,300, but we followed it up. 50,000 hectares has been followed up, some repeatedly. So we've cleared 91,000 hectares, but that's the initial and follow-up. And what we see, what you will also see, in the beginning you get a high spike in initial, and then it starts initial clearing, and then it starts tapering off, and your follow-ups will. So if you look at our graphs now, and it's all in the decision support system, you will see follow-up start becoming more than initial. The principle is wasting money if you don't know how you're going to follow up. Because then you take the money, clear nicely, and we're happy, stand back and wash our hands. 6 months to a year, and when a fire comes through, it triggers everything. So this is the business case, and we had 24 stakeholder engagements in 2 years. I had meetings with 50 people in the room, and then 2. We went to Magazine where we had the meeting. We had the scientists on board, and crucial municipality. So there's building blocks. Must I stop talking? Starting to stop when I'm stopping.
Alright, so I'll move on to the last few of my slides and then hand straight over to you.
Okay.
So yeah.
Can I just say what the building blocks are?
Yeah. It's an actual point.
Okay, so the key building blocks for a waterfront to work is municipal involvement. We need to understand our stakeholders. Who are stakeholders? There's groupings here. What are we interested about? We're not all interested in the same thing. So we listen, we talk, we understand the stakeholder environment. I asked Natalie, what do you care about? Why are you here? Everybody's here for a different reason. But we have to take our interests and say some interests are not realistic. And we've got to be brave about it and say, what's the scope? What are we trying to do? So then we come up with what's the problem we want to solve? We quantify the problem and we ask the question, who cares? Who will pay for this? Because without funding, it's not paid. So then a clear plan, a clear return on investment. So what do we want to do? Where do we want to do it? How do we want to do it? With whom do we want? How much will it cost? And how do we know we succeed? It's not how many hectares we clear. What's the goal? The goal is more water in the system. And that if we're not clear on that, there's other things that co-benefits, but it's about water in the system. And then the look at how are we going to pay for it, so that what Marie mentioned, the blended funding model is the model that works here. But we have to have a long-term vision. So we have about 50 water funds globally. There are about, I think, 6 or 7 in Africa and 3 in South Africa. And I think the water fund model works really well because it's science-based, it's inclusive, you know who's paying. We call it the fails fest. So we looked at water funds, there were many that failed. And we looked at why did they fail. And I can share later, because I won't take on the air time. We looked at why do they fail. And we learned from that. So when we do a pre-feasibility, it's always best to start with pre-feasibility. So, okay, can a water fund work here or not? And then we have a go, no-go decision. And if the critical factors are not involved, we don't do it, because then it's not the solution, because then you're chasing something that's not going to work. So I'm happy to, if there's more questions, to answer them, but over to you.
So I think what I'm going to do, I'm conscious of time, and I know we've got 10 minutes left, and it hasn't been any discussion yet. So what I'm going to do is just jump over most of this. Louise, I think you contextualized everything that I was going to cover. Some predictions around the do nothing. So this is a recent study that showed that actually if you do nothing, and this happens around the Keurbooms dam, you go from a 2.99% reduction in NRL to, it's 1.55% reduction in NRL to almost 50%. So 50% of your raw water disappearing into the air because of alien trees. And just remember, this data was based on 2008 survey of alien plants, right? So that's almost a good few years, almost 20 years later. How much more are we losing than 1.55? And that would then equate to 63.94 million cubic meters of water in the Western Cape water supply system. That would equate to 74 billion rand per annum to the GDP, and then also 217,000 jobs, which would be a 5% dent in the unemployment rate. So just showing you what that water they use by alien plants actually does to our economy and our downstream systems. This is not philanthropic. 49 million rand worth of investment leverages 88 million rand worth of water sales. So this is a business case, as Louise has mentioned. It's been well proven. These are the figures that I used for the other calculation you've seen. I'll leave them in the slide for you to see, but this was a economist taking a look at the value of water in the Western Cape water supply system and breaking down that value through primary, secondary, and tertiary industries, as well as an average, which should not be there, so there's something wrong there. And then there are also other social benefits: upskilling, social improvement, access to resources, environmental awareness. So what you're seeing as a perceptions chart, the red is the negative perception, the dark blue is the positive perception, and the sort of light blue is the neutral. And you can see overwhelmingly the people who participate in these programs have a good perception about them and the impact on their livelihoods. This catchment has a lot of information that this group can build off of, including looking at some municipalities. It's got 2 management unit control plans, the Keurbooms and the Keurbooms, that actually break down what it means to invest in ecological infrastructure in the Keurbooms catchment to a compartment level. So what Louise was saying is, which ones are the most important, where should we be focusing our attention? It allows you to model investment scenarios. If you have 15 million rand, where would you clear? These are the compartments. If you have 2.5 million rand, where would you clear? It also allows you to have multiple partners working on the same landscape without stepping on one another's toes. So we implement the ecological infrastructure investment framework through exploring funding opportunities, unlocking new streams of funding, so that's things like biomass beneficiation, downstream value chains, including ecological infrastructure in things like infrastructure budgets is another one, and then partnerships and collaboration. And this is what Marlene was referencing when she spoke about how difficult it is to sort of tie everybody into a catchment approach. It is exceedingly difficult. The co-creative element that we spoke to is absolutely vital. If people don't see the solution as legitimate or recognize it, it will not be implemented. And this is how we implement through our partners, and you should see Kiwis, Addo, and NBT, among many others in this landscape. This is where we work through our partners, with our partners. We're also trying to improve private sector investment, but Louise has touched on that. It's all those building blocks that we mentioned are things that private investors need for them to actually park money towards the program. And then in this landscape, we've done quite a bit. The first was the people payment fee with some services models, Vita municipality. We got quite far along the road, and unfortunately it didn't materialize, but it did give us a good foundation of where things went wrong, as Louise mentioned. So we've got that information. We've established the Keurbooms Ecological Infrastructure Investment Working Group, which Keith was deputy chair of, the vice chair. So that group exists, it's done a lot of work. We've also done things like the group farm plans, so there are 2 landowners in the room, you will be part of one of those group farm plans.
Correct.
And it looks at your farm, the extent of ambient plants, and also what you want to achieve through eradicating those plants. Where they are, what that would cost, the logistics around it. So there is actually quite a rich foundation of information in that source of information. We've also looked at the job creation potential of the ecological construction investment in these catchments, which is reflected here. So on a ward basis, this is how prioritization would look if you were solely looking for socioeconomic upliftment through ecological construction investment. This is not around water gains or around fire risk. This is about where people are and who needs jobs. Spoken to this is the recipe for payment for ecosystem services or economic policy instruments. It's pretty much what the municipality would need to follow if they were to start generating revenue from a water fund type approach. And here's the Keurbooms Ecological Infrastructure Working Group, as well as the group farm concept plans and the group farms. So thank you to the farmers here, or the landowners who participate in that project. And that's where their farms are. They're blobs, so you can't identify who the farmers are. Good copy. And these are just covers of the documents. And most recently, we touched on how do you measure success. So in the paid catchments approach, there's quite a lot of money that went into telemetry. We realized that that was going to be quite a struggle for many landscapes. So we asked one of the local service providers to come up with a citizen science approach. So Apex came up with a citizen science approach to understand water releases, rehabilitation gains, water quality gains, arising from alien clearing in a very rudimentary way, very low-tech way. And then you've got the OTE Tacoma Water Working Group, which is chaired by the Garden and Biosphere Reserve, that also has a state of knowledge report, which can be downloaded from this link. And you should see your organization listed in the right-hand side. If you're not listed there, I would really recommend reaching out to Garden and Biosphere Reserve. Yeah, and I think from that point on, just to say there are multiple models for how a municipality can invest in ecological infrastructure. You've got the gold standard, which is what Louise and the company have established with Dedicated on Water Fund, and then you've got less sophisticated approaches, just recognizing the role of ecological infrastructure in municipal planning documents, or helping identify important areas of ecological infrastructure, and then the last stage is actually parting with good money towards achieving the objectives of those investment profiles. And today what we would like to do is approach each municipality for in principle, actually maybe stronger than in principle agreement, a formal agreement to explore ecological infrastructure towards water security as well as its other co-benefits in this landscape. But as Louise has mentioned, and as Marlene mentioned, this is the start of a very long conversation. It's not something that will happen overnight. So at the moment it's just endorsements, and then hopefully budgets will follow from that point on. And that's been proven in other municipalities. When people get around the table and start talking about this issue, money does start emerging. Either through in-kind at first, but later on people start parting with money towards seeing these investment opportunities realized. So thank you very much.
Okay, so the 1 hour mark, we really wanted to have the opportunity for questions. So if you have the time, would you like to have that space to have some questions? Yes. Okay, so are there any questions from the floor? I'll probably just repeat them so that those who are listening on the live stream can hear what the question is. We don't have a mobile mic. Yes, Johan.
I would very much like Louise just to give us in a minute an idea of where the money is going to come from.
Okay, so Johan from St. Paul's is just asking Louise to elucidate on where the money would come from for a project such as this.
Could I add to that question, that particularly for this very early pre-feasibility stage, typically where has the money come from in other water funds?
Yeah, and particularly for the pre-feasibility study, where has the money come from in other examples of water funds around the country or in the world?
So for these different phases, the one is pre-feasibility, feasibility, business case development, and then the implementation for the long term. And in for the science of feasibility and pre-feasibility is philanthropy. Because philanthropy from private, that's where it comes from. Because corporates don't like to fund science. And we won't do a water fund if we don't have no one. So, and then when it is during the high impact phase implementation, it's a mix of philanthropy, corporates, and municipalities. The last phase is, now I'll use the example of Greater Cape Town Water Fund. Initially it was philanthropy, we did the science and we produced a business case. Then the City of Cape Town said, oh, we can see, this is part of our new water strategy, and the city invested 25 million rand a year now for 5 years. One of the things the municipality cannot, they say they cannot invest outside the municipal boundary. We've done a legal study. Terry Stanley did the study to see under what conditions can the municipality do this legal study, which I can share. Municipality can invest outside the boundary of the city. Then I mentioned we cleared 90,000 hectares, and initially Cape Town was as a drought crisis, so whoever used water, corporate said we are in, we want to contribute. We had at some stage 9 corporates that all contribute, we just can't run out of water. Great, we thought we are out of problems, we're living another day zero scenario. Now we're stuck because it's very expensive, and we always knew it would be, because you have a different approach. You do low infestations plus 80-20. Put 20% of your effort in low infestations, get the hectares, get it under control, 80% in where the dense infestations are. So now we're short about 150, 160 million rand to clear that last 15,000 hectares and continue with the follow-up. And we are, then there's a lot of talk about innovative funding, water bonds, water credits, and there's not one that works. So we hope to launch the first water bond in the world in March. It's with Rand Merchant Bank, and how it works is there's an investment component and an outcomes-based funding component. And that outcomes-based funders are, it's 150 million rand that comes to the water fund. It's for 5 years, and we will then meet the target of 55,300 hectares. Now, what after that? Catchment management agencies, it's their responsibility, but they're not investing. They invest, but they don't have the resources or capacity to invest where the problem is. They invest in this river and that river, not where the water comes from. So there's a paradigm shift that needs to happen. And then there's opportunities to unlock the water resource management charge, long-term investment, so that they can work on that tail end. We need much less. So it's philanthropy, corporates, municipality, potential innovative instruments like water bonds, and then water resource management charge CMA. That's how we see the journey, and I think that's the only way that's going to work.
Another question from you, Patrick?
Yes, if I may, to build on to that, and hopefully get to John's question about what would we like coming out of the meeting. My understanding is that the municipality played a critical role in that they would agree to buy the additional water that's liberated. This is a private-public partnership, right? And I come from the private sector. We don't often do things without some kind of return. To me, the municipal water service group, whatever they call, their commitment to buy water will underpin the private investment portion of that. If that's correct, then it's very important to your question, John, that the municipality understands the critical role that they would have to play in this regard. And before we collectively spend millions and millions, I think we spent 6 million rand on the feasibility study. Before we even go to that step, we see whether we have their in principle approval, and then firmed up obviously once we've done a pre-feasibility study, so that they give us a firmer commitment. Otherwise, we don't have businesses in place. The same for corporates that Cape Town had to contribute. So the case is a bit harder to sell here, so we'd be highly dependent on the municipal commitments in support of this project. So that would be nice if we could lay the foundation. They're not going to get into one meeting, but at least let's make a start. And then the other point is that things are, I'm fairly new to this, but things are quite murky. The River Dam has this problem associated with it. A lot of the water runs into the sea that we would clear from aliens. There's a complex modelling that has to take place, which is different. I'm sure it was complex in Cape Town as well. But it's different in that we don't have empty dams here, other than the little one waiting to catch the water that we free up. And if it's running out into the sea and not being stored into the dam, then the municipality is not going to be too inclined to pay. So those complexities will need to be aired in.
So if I can just paraphrase that, so it's a question around a commitment from the municipality to buy the water that is freed up, and then also a question around the fact that the doesn't have a storage facility for storing excess water when the river flow is high.
So if you say the municipality buy the water, does it mean they first have to sell to buy? Because if that is the case, I don't think there's enough people paying for water in a fairly small town like Clifford Bay to get that revenue, to come close to what's expenditure. So if the municipality has to give a commitment, they must understand that what the income is going to be and what the expenditure will be to clear aliens.
Yeah, so there's just an added question there about, the municipality not being a city and not enough people paying for water to warrant the expenses. Really, do you want to?
I just put around this because we get, when we talk about these things, we get stuck in two things always. Governance, using power, who's going to tell me what to do, and money. Before we get there, let's understand the problem, and the question would be then to the municipality. So this is what it will cost over the next 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. Then we ask the question, because before we could say to them, you've got to pay, and they said, I don't know how much we're talking about here, so you can't expect anyone to pay if they don't know what the end goal is.
Sure.
So let us not get ahead of ourselves. If the stakeholder interest, we're linking upstream landholders to downstream. Each waterfront is different. So the key question would be, what's the funding model of getting this problem under control, and how will we keep it at it for the next 30, 50 years? So I would say, is there interest? Yes. Show me what you're talking about, and then we talk money. Because it's I feel we put landowners, or whoever in the corners, you've got to pay what for it. And then we can model it again and say, okay, if this is how much it costs, and we look at the blended funding model, and then we say to the municipality, and it's a question that I want to put back, I'm going to ask Anthony, you pay X rand per litre. Would you be willing, so I'm going to use a figure, you pay 1 rand per litre of water. to get the water in the tank, would you be willing to pay R1.02? And that 2 cents goes back into catchment restoration. If there's a clear case, if there's a model, everything, you see the figures and you see how it's spent, by whom, where, there's a monitoring in place to say, I'm getting more water, I can see that. Would the citizens of this town be willing to pay 2 cents more? Just making it very simple, South African.
It was really first.
I think the bitter situation is actually very easy, and it's going to make it easier for you guys now that we're going through this drought period, speaking to the municipality again. But we've got the main water source is the Keurbooms River. Then we've got the desal plant, which is 2 megalitres a day, if it's in full operation. Then we've got boreholes and the storage there. Now, it's all about finance. The Bitter municipality, of course, would like to use that water and sell that water that's the cheapest to obtain, which is the river. If they come from the river into the dam and abstract from the dam, they're paying more for that. I think it's double or 3 times the amount. Desal plant actually runs at a loss. It costs more to make that water than they can actually get from selling the water. So your idea also about charging a bit more, and I listened to this gentleman here about funds. Would it be, if you listen to John Roberts, we've got a minimum flow we require from the Keurbooms River of 500 litres a second to keep it ecologically sustainable. I don't want to hear these people about moaning about water flowing into the sea. If it doesn't flow into the sea, we've got no beaches, we've got a flooded lagoon, they don't even know the consequences of that.
And obviously it's above that threshold.
Yeah. So if you follow this over the last 20 years, it flows very flat. You'll see it spikes now. We'll have massive floods coming down. It comes down very rapidly. And the thing is to pump that water at that time into Waters Dam or another off-channel dam. But the idea that you said earlier on, maybe Water Affairs could charge more for the Keurbooms water and pump that into alien clearing. I don't know if that's an idea. So they charge the municipality more. And then just before I'm finished, I don't want to say more. I'd like to know, you met with Jessica Kamkam and Julie was with you guys and everything before she left. And that was before this drought situation. What was the outcome of that meeting? And has it changed going into this meeting?
The outcome of that meeting was that Jessica actually asked us to come and present to council. So this is the outcome of that meeting.
Not related to the drought?
Not related to drought, this is pre-drought. I think maybe, I would imagine that the drought actually caused a bit of a delay to get us in the room because people had panic station and emergency response.
Good sounds good.
Yeah. So this is full circle of that initial discussion that Julie Carlisle and Tim started.
So just to repeat also that question, would Department of Water Affairs be able to charge more for extraction from the Keurbooms River because that is the cheapest water?
If we feed up the flow.
Yes.
So if we get more flow in and more constant flow, not the constant flow, we have these spikes going up and down, but the constant flow is the groundwater is freed up.
So Bitter pays Department of Water Affairs for water.
Every drop of water they get out of the Keurbooms, they have to pay.
Okay.
Not much, but they have to pay.
So if that fee was increased, the balance could be used for alien
It's a
care.
question.
Yeah.
We are working with Volkman and the Department of Water and Sanitation. There's in principle approval to look at that, and we will do that because the water bond in Cape Town will not kick off until the investors say that we're putting money in here for 5 years. What's going to happen after 5 years? So the thing that will activate the bond is a charge. And that mechanism is going to be, we're working it out. It will be piloted in Cape Town and it will be rolled out nationally. So that's a crucial point and it's possible.
Because the municipality hasn't got we are a very small municipality. We might be very wealthy from the people who live here, but they haven't got the funds. They struggle just to build an off-channel storage dam with North Western Cape supporting. And as the gentleman here said, we haven't got big corporates or big companies here that are going to come on board. We might have a single donor or something. So we'll need a constant flow of money.
Part of the business, so you have a business case and it's dead without fuel. So what we will do is we will do a financing study. So it will say that how much will it cost over the next 30 years, where will the funding come from, and we will do a financial model. And that will be all part, and stakeholders will see this unfold. And then we don't come with a ready-made thing and say this is now it. It's a process.
Yeah.
And that we look at the mix and you look at the probabilities. When we did the Keurbooms business case, a water bond was not even in anybody's mind. We said innovative financing will be great, but the chances of it getting off the ground is. So if you have a shortfall and a municipality is too small to get us over that high impact phase, a bond can work. A water bond can work, but it means we've got to have the science. We're working now for 2 years on the Keurbooms water bond. There's a glide path. We have to hit targets.
Could the return come back to the payment of the water extracted from the river? Because you said if somebody invests in it, how would you return that investment? Could that maybe be a work with the Department of Water Affairs that would collect that and then we pay them? I don't know.
They will be part of the building of the thing. So all of these questions are super valuable because that's the questions that we have to ask along the journey and then model it, get the answers, see what's probable and not. But DWS will be part of product development and hopefully will come to, and then just because we form working groups, a technical working group and a finance working group and a monitoring working group, and each working group has a lead, and that's where people can play an important role to build it and eventually all of these things happen.
Yeah, I just want to also remind people that, water services are a whole. You need to look at them completely. And so Jan's question around you don't have enough people to pay for the water. Investing in ecological infrastructure is not just about the water. There's a huge risk, financial risk to the municipality around fire, amongst other. So I think we tend to want to compartmentalize things and try and solve, this is just a water problem. No, it's not just a water problem. It's an infrastructure problem. Even the water services. Many municipalities in the Western Cape have unaccounted for water. So if you're pumping, 2 megalitres from your new diesel plant or wherever else in some municipality, you may be losing half of it before it reaches the user because of water's lost to the system. So you need these links between grey and green infrastructure, but also to not become single-minded that it's only going to be a payment for ecosystem services model where you levy the person paying for water only. It has to be blended. So bulk water charges and water resource management charges are one thing, and making sure it gets applied properly, and how we can blend that into other financing models. The retail tariffs, they're also another potential. So we've looked at all of these actually in the context of developing the ecological infrastructure model as well. But it's really, really not useful just to compartmentalize it in one way. We need to look at the broad range of risks. And those risks have inherent costs. And I know that drought is a big deal right now, and especially just coming out of a big tourist season. So there may be things that the municipality also needs to look at. What about a surety of supply tariff? We've got very, very large numbers of urban, maybe houses that are vacant for most of the winter or wherever. And I know this was a context in the Manas. We can learn from the Manas. They started to look at, well, when you're here in the season, you now expect to operate your 6 bathrooms with your 30 guests or whatever it is. That has an implication for the municipality. You're not paying for water the whole year and then you expect to be able to operate 6 bathrooms in the summer where there's very little water. So again, if it's a water services issue, Don't just look at ecological infrastructure. Look at the whole water services plan. Look at everything that's around those water services. And then if it's around ecological infrastructure, it's not just about water either. It's about addressing multiple risks and multiple opportunities. So we haven't really touched a lot of the biomass stuff, or the carbon credits, or biodiversity credits, or any of that sort of thing, but that's all part of the whole ecosystem of blended financing approaches. But yes, I mean, Johanna, your point, and I know we've discussed this before, you cannot rest it only on that one mechanism, because it won't work. It is not sufficient users, paying users.
That's why I asked the question. It's not a case of I'm thinking it's going to come out of the water alone. But there are very few other things that will pay. You're not going to easily make someone pay for fire protection. It's not all. Or if you decide you're going to charge people taxes for it, you charge people taxes for houses and heating. It's still only a small portion of people that pays the taxes. And if you add all those, if you take the 2% on the one hand, and the municipality can tell us today what the water revenue is, and take 2% of that, you add that, then you have a clear number. And unless that number runs into the hundreds of millions,
We're not going to solve, we don't have enough.
then the problem is solved. And those are things that one should have on the table early. If you can't get over the main obstructions, then the small ones are going to be easy, it's the big ones it's.
So I mean, I think this is the basis on which we want to move forward, is to actually test the feasibility, look at all the blended financing options, and engage the municipality around that. Public sector must have skin in the game. Private sector is definitely going to have skin in the game, and citizens will ultimately have skin in the game, because your services are going to be dependent on finding that solution. So yeah, I would just caution us against, well, it's all about water, and it's going to be payment for ecosystem services. It just simply can't be. It needs to be a multitude of strategies.
I'm just very cognizant of the time, because there's a 1 o'clock meeting, obviously, that Louise and John need to get to. So, I don't know, Louise, you wanted to add something there, but were there any more questions? Chris, you did have your hand up.
No, I was just wanting to answer the question posed to me as an individual house owner, would I be willing to pay 2 cents extra? I sure would, if you can guarantee me that my tariffs won't increase over the next 5 years. It's as simple as that. So it's a huge incentive to have a guarantee for an essential service and the cost that you pay for that essential service. I'm more than willing to pay more today if you can guarantee me that over the next 5 years my water bill won't escalate like crazy. If you watch what's going on the social networks here, as a response to the tariff increases for overconsumption that were announced, I mean, people go ballistic over a theoretical increase in price. It's not even there yet, because most of us haven't overconsumed, but those who do have overconsumed invent all sorts of conspiracy theories that this is a money-making scheme and so forth, which shows you that the individual consumer, I think, will be very happy to invest into the future of a particular service. And I must say, I take this point about the need for an integrated perspective onto this, but it's very hard to sell a complex integrated scenario to a consumer. They want accountability around right down in every little compartment and aspect of it. So you have to balance off those two aspects. In short, yes, I'm willing to pay an extra 2 cents, an extra 10 cents on my R1 if I get some sort of undertaking from the provider what my benefit will be. And it's as simple as that.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. So we're going to need to bring it to a close, but I know you wanted to say something.
I mean, the one thing I just wanted to say from the municipal perspective is that the 6 million rand figure that we spoke about now is not necessarily 6 million rand. It's often in-kind contributions. It's people coming in and doing assessments and helping the initiative. So in many instances, it wasn't an upfront cash start. It was in-kind contributions, people's hours of the day that then got to a point where actually people were comfortable with part of the money. So I expect in this landscape it will also actually really low. We've got a lot of in-kind contribution already in this landscape. So it's not starting at 0, you're probably starting somewhere close to 6, but needing to rejig it a lot.
Also, just from our side, we are prioritising the garden route in terms of our municipal program and supporting municipalities in developing infrastructure, ecological infrastructure investment plans. Vito's obviously got great appetite, expressed through the mayor, wants us to get going, wants us to get going already. Our budget becomes available in April, we have already started that process. And so, for example, we would try and make sure that if we did the preparatory work around invasive alien species mapping and maps, that really meets the data standard requirements that TNC or the Greater Cape Water Fund can use. So that's already skin in the game, it's already contributing towards that feasibility study. And that's, if we coordinate with each other, we can really achieve a lot more with our limited pennies. And so that 6 million can become reduced by our contributions and co-financing as well. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, big thank you to John and Louise for that presentation, and Marlene for all your input, but especially to all of you driven from deep in the mountains, from Cape Town, from George and Neisner. Yeah, so this is just the start of something very exciting, and we're going to obviously see what happens in the meeting now with the mayor and council, and but we have this collaborative atmosphere now, which is fantastic. Does feel a little bit like herding cats, as you say, but I think the overarching impetus is the same. It's about the restoration of our catchment, and so we just all need to see where we fit in the puzzle and what we can contribute and what is needed to fill the gaps. So thank you all very, very much for coming, and we will keep you posted. If you want to say anything else in closing?
Just thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
As a stakeholder, can I say thank you to you for organising all this? The presentations are really awesome. What's been achieved is amazing. So it's very impressive what has been done. I'm very excited to see what happens.
Yes.
Can I access the presentation somewhere?
Yes, there's a copy of the presentation with Lauren at the moment. What I'll do is I'll make a PDF version because I use animation, so if you just take it at face value, you won't get the whole thing. But the presentation that's given today, I just did some slides. The presentation given to the municipality will be the full thing, and I'll PDF that to send it to everyone.
Okay, so it will be,
We can put it on that
distribute
group.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can rule me out of order, but one of the other big problems we have as most municipalities is unemployment. And this would catch the ear of the municipality quite nicely. I'm sure you do this, but I would really emphasize job creation.
It was actually Deputy Mayor that actually suggested one of the socioeconomics, so I'm hoping it lands.